Behind me is the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, one of the finest natural history museums in America today. From the very beginning, this museum has been a partner with Exploring North Carolina in telling the story of this state's natural resources. We work closely with its staff and scientists, both at the museum and in the field. At this museum, you'll find wonderful exhibits telling the story of North Carolina's past and its distant past. You'll also find living animals with which they tell the story of North Carolina today. And that's our story on Exploring North Carolina, Living Collections. Just as the museum has scientists dealing with rocks, minerals, and dinosaurs, it has experts to take care of living collections. Exploring North Carolina spent several days behind the scenes with the museum's animal care specialist. The director of Living Collections is Bob Fluke. Few people know more about animals and their needs across North Carolina than Bob and his staff. I asked Bob why it is important to have living animals as part of the museum collection.
If for no other reason than a live animal really grabs people's attention, is much more effective in getting the message across. If you come and you compare areas that do not have a live animal or a live exhibit in it with the areas that do, I mean, even the foot traffic, if you look at the carpet wear in the museum, in the areas where we have live exhibits, there's a much heavier wear pattern in the carpet. And I'll tell you what, when you're doing educational programs, if you're doing a program that has a connection to the living world, of course there's many geology programs and paleontology programs, so you might not need a live specimen, but as soon as you pull a live animal out for a programming, it just grabs people's attention. People listen that much more. If it's in an exhibit area, they'll read the text that much more closely. And I think that people just naturally, everybody has a connection to live things everywhere.
I also asked Adrian Yurka, manager of the Program Animals Collection, why living animals help tell the story of the natural world.
I look at live animals as kind of a universal communicator. So no matter who you are, at some point in time, you've connected with another live thing in some way or another. So live animals are a great introduction to a lot of folks, no matter who they are, to the museum. And it's a great way of drawing people into what's being taught or the exhibits that they're looking at.
We asked Adrian Yurka and his colleague, Bill Reynolds, coordinator of the museum's Arthropod Zoo, how living collections help visitors understand the many connections between plants and animals in the natural world.
So the living vertebrates and invertebrates are great examples of, again, I harken back to a universal communicator. Someone can see a live animal, become interested in it, and then through exhibits or through programming, learn about ties to the rest of the ecosystem, how this animal fits in, and how without these animals, the ecosystem fails to thrive, and then things start collapsing.
Here in the Arthropod Zoo, we maintain a lot of different species in it, and at any given time, as many as 100 to 150 species. And these animals occupy a lot of different trophic levels and ecological roles in the environment. As many people are familiar, some arthropods are pollinators, some are carnivores that eat other insects. Many, if not most, are part of the food chain for larger animals. If you were to look at the world's ecosystems, arthropods in many respects are kind of like the fluids in the engine, like the transmission fluid, the gasoline, the oil. They keep many of the ecosystems going, all the way up from decomposers, pollinators, to being integral parts of the food chain. So without many of the invertebrates, most of the ecosystems, particularly terrestrial systems here in North Carolina, would be very different environments indeed.
One of the great stories in the state of North Carolina is that of biodiversity. This story is told through the living collections at the museum. The story of extreme diversity on our land is told by Phil Bradley, the coordinator of terrestrial exhibits. The story of animals in the water is told by Meredith Bayer, coordinator of fish and invertebrates. Meredith also explained how fish exhibits at the museum are closely tied to our varied landscape.
I think one of the important things that we try to relay to visitors is how special North Carolina is with the biodiversity. We have this wide range of animals, and it really is quite incredible. And so we find it very important to showcase the salamander species that you might have to travel all the way to the mountains to get to experience. We have them right here. Again, kind of showcases that need for conservation of those animals and to celebrate the fact that we have such a wide diversity within our state.
So at the Museum of Natural Sciences, we have exhibits that cover every habitat type for the fish that are available to us. We try to portray those habitat types so that the visitor can have and experience a habitat that they may not ever be able to get to. So we have mountain fish, and we have smaller mountain fish, not necessarily the trout or the game fish. We have the fish that if you were to put on a mask and a snorkel and hop in, those fish that you would see then, not the fish that you would catch on a fishing pole, because those are the fish that you may not know are actually there. We have pond impoundment fish, so fish that would live in a slow water pond that may be around a beaver area. We have Piedmont stream fish. We also have fish that are of the coastal plain, and those are a little bit bigger, the sunfish and the gar variety. Now when we move down to the saltwater areas, we try to pick out the smaller habitats. So the hard bottom where the coquina outcrops would be, we want to picture those fish. Or the eelgrass area with the seahorses and pipefish and shrimp, animals that would live in an eelgrass environment, and also a salt marsh and an open water area. So as the visitor moves through the museum, they leave with the feeling that they've experienced a number of habitat types that they would encounter as they drove through North Carolina to experience the environment.
Here at the museum, children of all ages can see fish, snakes, turtles, and salamanders. And just as with your cat and dog, there are medical emergencies. Here on site at the museum, you'll find a clinic and a veterinarian. With hundreds of species of animals in North Carolina, can you imagine a single veterinarian constantly dealing with different types of animals throughout the day? Well, that's exactly what happens at the museum. Dr. Dan Dombrowski deals with medical emergencies involving snakes, salamanders, turtles, fish, mammals, and even insects.
I work with a lot of fish and reptiles and amphibians. Those are all vertebrates that are common here in our museum collection. I also work with a lot of arthropods or invertebrates, and so a very diverse collection of animals. No pets, no dogs and cats. But other than that, a lot of species. I think we have about 200 species represented here in the museum collection, and they're all fair game for our veterinary services group.
At this working hospital, much of the activity can be seen by museum visitors as Dan, his staff, and veterinary students from North Carolina State University work on a variety of creatures.
We work with pre-vet students from NC State as interns. We work with veterinary students also from NC State in the program. And we have, in our clinical space, we do everything from physical exams. So you may see a physical exam on a turtle or a snake. You may see an evaluation of a fish. We may have anesthesia, and whether it's a land animal or an aquatic species. where we would anesthetize those animals either for, again, an exam or maybe surgery. We do have the tools and equipment and setup to perform surgeries as well. So any of those are possible here at the window. Visitors join us as we work on the animals and work with the students, and they can ask questions and see close-ups of our procedures. We have cameras and microphones.
If you think your doctor has it tough dealing with one species, humans or Homo sapiens, listen to Dr. Dan as he tells about the challenges of being a multi-species doctor.
We see everything from salamanders that are, they fit in the palm of your hands, to our largest animal. We have a giant snapping turtle here at the museum. That's probably our largest animal, over 60 pounds actually. But things as simple as size can be a challenge in the patients you work with. Some species are aquatic and live in the water, some are not and live on the land. Some have lungs, are air breathers. Some don't have lungs. We have plethodonid salamanders that are land-dwelling salamanders that don't have lungs. So there are a lot of differences that you've got to sort of approach each case as a unique case. Sometimes there's not a lot of information out there on these species. So literally it's the Wild West or cutting edge sometimes of medicine. People haven't really done the procedures, if ever, not many times in the species we work with. And so we have to really do a lot of critical thinking and sort of take what we know from the species we've learned from, things like dogs and cats and people, and use that knowledge of medicine for those species and sort of apply that to our other, to the animals we work with here at the museum.
Anytime you are dealing with medical emergencies, close connections can develop, especially when the animals you treat can live a decade or more.
The more you work with species and the more species you work with, there's a real connection there, whether it's a turtle or a tortoise, you know, with big brown eyes, or your Labrador at home with big brown eyes. There's really a connection, and so each one of these cases, they kind of become family, and it's something that's really important to us to keep them healthy and make good decisions in their health care and their quality of life. A lot of animals in the collection live for many years. We have salamanders that have been here for 15 years, and to be able to maintain them and for them to be healthy, we've got to really understand their natural history and try to match that.
Not all emergencies in the museum's living collection can be handled by a veterinarian. Many emergencies relate to equipment failures or temperature changes and require the quick response of the museum staff.
We have had emergencies at the museum, and emergencies happen as long as you have an animal in captivity. We are pledged to keep these guys as healthy as possible all the time. And when you have an animal that lives in a tank, that is their environment. And it's all based on mechanics. So if anything mechanical happens or goes wrong, then we end up with an emergency. My staff and I have had to come in at all hours to meet these emergencies. We had a plumbing break at one point, and we had to come in at 4:30 in the morning to fix the plumbing. Fortunately, no fish were lost in that emergency, but if something had happened, we have those calls in place so that we can make it in to make sure that nothing does happen.
We have a call tree, so anybody in living collections can be contacted. It's very organized. If whatever it is affecting just one area, then that's the staff that will be called. But we're really on duty 24 hours a day.
At the museum, we see how sensitive animals are to disease, temperature variation, and other changes in their environment. The museum staff has to manipulate and adjust a mechanical environment. Just like the museum staff acts as protectors and stewards of the animals in its collection, we must be good stewards of the natural world. As individuals and as a state, it will take effort and knowledge to protect and maintain the biodiversity around us. If you think it is difficult to come up with a 7-day meal plan for your family, imagine how difficult it is for the museum staff to come up with a meal plan for over 200 species. Dr. Dan and the museum experts gave Exploring North Carolina a look at the foods required to feed everything from rattlesnakes to seahorses to hungry caterpillars.
Well, every animal species requires something special. So it might be a higher protein diet. Some animals are strictly vegetarian. It is important to have some natural history knowledge of what they feed on in the wild in order for us inside captivity to offer them the correct types of foods.
And so a lot of times with species that are in collections, like our museum collection, we're going back to the natural history, and we have to sort of understand what they do in their natural habitat, what the temperatures are, what the photoperiod or the light cycles are, what their diet is, what is the main diet. We can't go to the grocery store in most cases and buy dog food for our salamanders. We have to actually get in this case, insects or arthropods, and we have to match that natural diet so that we can give them the right nutrients.
There isn't a specific thing that we can feed every single fish in our collection. These fish have diets in their natural environment that we have to replicate while they're in captivity. And just like us, they need vitamins, they need a vegetable, they need a meat. So they might need an omnivorous diet, and we have to figure out what they would eat naturally and try to replicate that.
Finding branches to cut and feed insects, that is a challenge. It's a challenge on several levels. One, we have to find areas where the landowners permit us to cut plants. We also have to make sure that those areas have not and are not frequently sprayed. We have to look at the quality and the health of the plant. If the plants aren't particularly healthy, then they aren't going to serve as adequate hosts for the insects we maintain. There are a number of challenges in keeping the plants, the cut branches fresh and alive, and also making sure that we obtain material in a way that isn't offensive to the landowners, and at the same time make sure that it's clean and good enough for the bugs.
You may not realize it, but the box turtle in your yard lives easily over 40 years. So if you bring it in, you're looking at taking it out of the wild population, and potentially this is an animal that's not going to be replaced easily. They're incredibly long-lived. So you're potentially doing harm to the wildlife. And then also the care is very challenging on wild animals. You have to know what they're getting in their natural environment and why. Something, again, that we think is simple, like a box turtle, it will love to eat crickets and proteins, but really it's got to eat a lot of salads and fruits and things like that, and really just feeding it what it wants to could actually be harmful to it.
On Exploring North Carolina, we have shown you how important volunteers are in the life of greenways and state parks. The same is true with the operation of living collections at this great museum.
We really could not get by without our volunteers museum-wide. I'd say within living collections, volunteers are critical, but with us, volunteers need to be trained. They need to know the museum. There's a lot more that goes into becoming a valuable volunteer with living collections. It's almost like they're de facto staff. We actually use maybe less volunteers overall than other museum sections, but the ones we have, we literally could not get by without.
After all the hard work by staff and volunteers in living collections, there has to be a time for celebration. Every year, the museum has special events at which the animals in living collections become the focal point of the museum.
When 15,000 people come to the museum for a reptile and amphibian day event, it's not just a great day for attendance. You're having a lot of those people come because they're not only coming because there's a great event, family, all of that, coming because they're interested in reptiles and amphibians. You have 10 or 12,000 of those 15,000 who they know when they come to the museum, they're going to have a great time, but they're also going to be able to meet, talk to, and interact with dozens and dozens of people who really know what they're talking about, also see all sorts of awesome animals. Really, the biggest event we have at the museum, and our signature event, is called Bug Fest, and that takes place now in September each year. And attendance of well over 32,000 to 35,000 people annually for the last 5 years. It's really awesome.
The next time you're in Raleigh, visit the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences with its ecosystem of more than 200 species of living animals. Here you'll find out what these animals eat, where they live, and what they need. All useful information while exploring North Carolina.